Welcome to the Climate Diplomacy Podcast, a podcast from Adelphi bringing you the latest insights and debates in international climate diplomacy. We are your hosts, Raquel Monayat and Hannah Kuonut. In this series, you will hear from leading experts offering their take on what needs to be done to promote climate foreign policy and provide you with the context you need to understand climate diplomacy today. For more information, please visit climate-diplomacy.org or follow us on Twitter under Climate Diplo.
In this episode, we will speak about China's Belt and Road Initiative with Daria Ivleva, Senior Advisor at Adelphi. She is the author of the new report of the MISTRA Geopolitics program called the Belt and Road Initiative. Does the geopolitics of China's outward investments put the brakes on decarbonisation? The case of Kazakhstan. Daria, welcome to the Climate Diplomacy Podcast.
Hi, Hannah. I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
So the report referred to the Belt and Road Initiative as a prime example of geopolitics of decarbonization. What do you mean by that?
Well, it is. It is really a prime example because it is this critical juncture between geopolitics and decarbonization. Why? Because Belt and Road Initiative invests in countries whose emission trajectories will substantially shape our chances of achieving or not achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement. So there you have the decarbonization component. But at the same time, the Belt and Road Initiative, of course, has a geopolitical dimension and has to do with geopolitical aspiration of China and its partners. So you do have an interlinkage that the two areas kind of influence each other. So speaking of why the Belt and Road Initiative is geopolitical, it is very important to avoid some misconceptions about it that are often encountered. So first of all, it is not a credit line. It's not a list of projects that is available somewhere where you can look up what's part of Belt and Road Initiative and what's not. It is a concept that describes China's international agenda. So it is a vision. Setting up the Belt and Road Initiative went along with a general change in China's international politics. Roughly at the same time as the initiative was set up, China's politics was also changing in the sense that the country wanted to shape international stage much more than it used to before that. This context was really helpful to understand that the Belt and Road Initiative is more of a concept and that it is connected to both economic goals of the country inside the country itself and outside it, and to the political goals the country pursues. So the Belt and Road Initiative is meant to help China develop internally, for instance, helping border regions to find new economic opportunities because they're better connected to their neighboring countries, helping China also connect to the Asian markets. But then again, it is also political because it is not just the economic connection to the Asian markets, but it is also about gaining influence in the Asian Pacific space. So it is a blend, actually, of economic goals and political goals. And I think it is very important to highlight this because A, it is really part of how China sees itself on the global stage, and B, it is very, very complex. It is pretty obvious that it would be difficult to describe China's international politics in a few words, so we should not expect to be able to describe the Belt and Road Initiative in a few words and to understand it easily. It is just very, very diverse in terms of its goals, and it's also diverse in terms of its means. For that matter, it is also not just about investments. It is also about intercultural exchange projects and building Chinese image and building the influence sphere of China politically, economically, technically, by exporting innovation as well. So it is very diverse and quite complex.
So you already touched upon some aspects of the following question, but I'd suggest that we go a step back and approach it with a more general question before looking at the case study. How did you come to look at the Belt and Road Initiative from a climate perspective, and why is this so important for the Paris Agreement?
Whoever works in the climate realm, to them it is pretty obvious that such initiatives are important for climate policies and for emission as outcomes, but maybe on the other way around, it is not always the focus, because also the Belt and Road Initiative poses so many challenges to so many people. So a lot of people are asking themselves, what does this do to our geopolitical landscape? What does this do to political landscapes in the countries where these funds go to? What does it have to do with China's position on the international stage? So maybe climate aspects are not necessarily in the forefront, but I do have to say that there is a big body of literature that looks at different implications of the Belt and Road. So not just the political implication, but also the environmental implications and implications on human rights and so on.
Since it's so important, do we already know how the Belt and Road Initiative will shape global emissions trajectories?
It is a tricky question, really, because I think it is more or less indisputable that there will be an impact because it's just a lot of money and a lot of finance. Well, at least before the pandemic, it was a big source of funding, but there is not enough data on which projects actually belong to the Belt and Road Initiative. So the Belt and Road Initiative is more of an umbrella concept that includes so many things. And if you go to a specific country, it's very difficult to say, okay, this specific cooperation with China, does it belong to the Belt and Road Initiative? Has it been there and it has been relabeled? So this is actually often the case that some projects and initiatives that already existed kind of come to be part of this Belt and Road umbrella. So in the end, as it is not very transparent which projects belong to the Belt and Road initiatives, it is also not so easy to tell how they might shift emissions specifically. However, there are some first calculations and approximations thanks to different research institutions who track the projects of the Belt and Road Initiative that allow us to at least estimate what the impacts could be.
Thank you, Daria, so much. That was already very interesting and gave us also a solid overview of the dynamics at play behind China's geopolitical interests and options around the Belt and Road Initiative. Now, your study adopts a case study approach. Let's dive deeper into this. China invests in so many different countries around the world. Why Kazakhstan for the Belt and Road?
I chose a case study approach because there is not so much data and the Belt and Road is so versatile. The projects are so different. They differ between countries and regions, and also the geopolitical context and the possible geopolitical aspirations behind these projects differ a lot. So it is very difficult to say in general how geopolitics and decarbonization interact with regard to Belt and Road projects. So this is why I thought it was important to look in detail at one country, to go also a bit beyond this assumption that is often encountered in op-eds in the press that China is kind of exporting dirty capacities to its partner countries, which is maybe part of the truth, but I felt it was not necessarily the whole truth. And this is why a case study approach is really interesting. So now, why Kazakhstan? Belt and Road invests in so many countries. There are so many different possibilities to choose from. But Kazakhstan is in a very interesting geopolitical position. So it is very important for the Belt and Road Initiative because it connects Europe and Asia in a way. The transportation infrastructure, for instance, in Kazakhstan is very important to the whole vision of the Belt and Road Initiative as an initiative that seeks to connect different economic spaces. And on the other hand, I was very interested in what happens in the countries, actually. So what context Chinese partners might find if they go to a specific country offering cooperation. And in Kazakhstan, you might see that there is a bit of a contradictory policy landscape because Kazakhstan's economy is emission intensive. But on the other hand, Kazakhstan also has a vision for economic transformation and for transforming its development model away from high emissions, high resource intensive economy. And there are already some progressive policies regarding renewable energy, energy efficiency, and so on and so forth. So I felt there is some potential of finding different projects, not just projects that support the high emission development model, but also some projects that might actually help Kazakhstan develop the lower emission economic branches.
So what do China's investment look like in Kazakhstan, and how might infrastructure investment plans in the country be more green or climate compatible?
The structure of the portfolio of Belt and Road projects is very similar to the development model of Kazakhstan itself. So the bulk of the projects actually supports the high emission, resource intensive development model, but there are, let's say, sprinkles of low emission projects. Specifically, renewable energies is one example. There are also some examples of urban transportation projects, improving urban transportation, which tends to reduce emissions. And also in this high emission spectrum, let's say, there are projects that match the aspiration of the Kazakh government to further develop their economic branches, to introduce more innovation, to refurbish their production capacities. And that's exactly what a lot of Belt and Road Initiative funds do or are used for.
Thank you. And for our listeners, spoiler alert, that in the paper you said that the balance of push and pull factors together with geopolitical motives are important. What do you mean by push and pull, and what does that have to do with the geopolitics of decarbonization?
The push and pull factors are important because it is not just Chinese aspirations that form the Belt and Road Initiative. It might sound like an obvious thing, but oftentimes when we speak about the Belt and Road Initiatives, we do focus on what China wants with it, on what China's goals are. But actually, partner countries, of course, play a big role. So in this study, I kind of dubbed the Chinese aspirations that are connected to the Belt and Road Initiative push factors, let's say Chinese push, and the factors that are active on the side of the partner countries are the pull factors. So they pull the investment to the countries. And it was very important because, of course, the projects of the Belt and Road Initiative are formed by so many actors on both sides, on the Chinese side and on the side of the partner countries. These actors come from the private sector, from the financial sector, from the government, of course. So it is quite obvious that the final result, the portfolio of the projects in the given country, will be shaped by so many factors, by the Chinese side, but also, in our case, by the Kazakhstani side.
And speaking of a comprehensive and cross-cutting approach, what about domestic transformation and the role of the EU?
This is a very important point that the study makes because, of course, we're not looking at the factors that shape the Belt and Road Initiative projects for the sake of it. The idea is to promote low carbon development. So the question that the study asks itself is, how can we do this? And we can do this by understanding better how a portfolio of projects emerges. So we've said that this portfolio of projects in a given country is formed by the aspirations and motives of actors that come from China, different actors, but it also is shaped by the actors from the given country, in our case, Kazakhstan. So to shift the incentives towards a more low carbon portfolio and to shift this important finance of the Belt and Road Initiative towards low carbon infrastructure in its partner countries, we need to change both incentives on the side of the partner country, but also cooperate more with China. From the perspective of the European policymakers, these are the factors one can work on with different instruments of climate diplomacy. You could work with China, of course, on trying to make the investments more transparent, on bringing together the different geopolitical agendas with the climate agenda, on trying to maybe achieve a certain standard of investments, or on trying to jointly make the economic diplomacy agendas of global players work more for achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement. And that can happen on different levels, and it is obviously a paramount task. But also you can work with the third countries, such as Kazakhstan, on forming their economic incentives or on providing expertise or providing other finance that can help the country move towards more low carbon, low emissions development agenda. And Europe, as you said, Europe needs to adopt a comprehensive climate diplomacy approach. What we mean by that, colleagues and myself who work on geopolitics of decarbonization, is that in the different diplomatic agendas and external agendas of the European Union, the goal needs to be to promote low emission economies. And this is not only true for climate and energy cooperation, this is also true for trade and investment cooperation, finance cooperation, development cooperation, peace and security collaborations, as well as scientific and educational projects that the EU might have with its partners. So really aligning these different agendas towards fostering a transformational shift towards low-emission economies is key. And one has to recognize, and we see that when we look at the Belt and Road Initiative and the opportunities of cooperation, that it will certainly create trade-offs with geopolitical agendas and questions and with how you cooperate or maybe are in an adversarial relationship with China on some points. So the need to find this balance between what we need to do together for the climate and the differences that one would have geopolitically is really a big task and something that the EU will tackle.
Finally, let's talk about the way ahead. What would you say should be a priority on the agenda for EU-China relations in 2021 and beyond?
Of course, there are a lot of issues on these joint agendas, and one of them will be the economic recovery post-pandemic. And as with all economic recoveries, we need to make sure that we work towards a more climate-compatible recovery, a green recovery, often cited as Build Back Better, but there are different slogans for this. And I think this is something where global players such as the EU, the US, China can contribute also by coordinating and having a dialogue among themselves. And with regard to Belt and Road specifically, of course, it is not just China who has such an agenda of economic diplomacy with which it seeks to build its own economic position on the global market, but also to build its political influence. Other players have other means, but in general, they also have their economic diplomacy agendas. And I think it is important to start a dialogue on how these agendas can be more climate compatible, well aware of the fact that it is, of course, very sensitive and it is connected with different international politics issues. But I think it is very important to start a conversation on how investment abroad through such agendas could be climate compatible and what is needed diplomatically to make this happen.
To summarize, we heard that the Belt and Road Initiative is a central economic diplomacy instrument of global power. It matters for the implementation of the Paris Agreement. Moreover, the Belt and Road Initiative is a prime example of how decarbonisation interacts with geopolitics. Firstly, it is driven by economic and geopolitical motives. Secondly, investments in energy, transportation or industry infrastructure are at its core, shaping emissions trajectories. We also learned that concerns about the Belt and Road Initiative's geopolitical ambitions standing in the way of decarbonisation need to be contextualized. Together with Daria, we explored the example of Kazakhstan, where Belt and Road Initiative investments go along with development and geopolitical goals of the host government. We also heard that promoting low-emission development is about action on push and pull factors and understanding their geopolitical dimension. Looking ahead, Europe needs a comprehensive diplomacy approach and an accelerated domestic transformation to work on a climate-compatible Belt and Road Initiative with China and target countries.
Daria, thank you so much for joining us today and for giving us insights on the geopolitics of decarbonization and the Belt and Road Initiative in Kazakhstan. For our listeners, if you would like to download the report, follow the link in the episode's description. We will be back with another episode of the Climate Diplomacy Podcast in a few weeks. In the meantime, you can reach us with questions and feedback at our Twitter channel at Climate Diplo. Thank you for tuning in, and until next time, goodbye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you.